I need you to just stay calm, okay? The doctors are with Liam right now. You don't need me there. That was the last thing my husband said before he boarded a plane to Whistler for a ski weekend with his friends, while our 11-month-old son was burning up with a fever of 104 inches the pediatric emergency ward. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just hung up the phone, looked at my baby boy in that hospital crib, and made a promise to myself that I would never forget this moment. My name is Natalie Okafor, and I'm 29 years old. I grew up in Mississauga, Ontario, in a household where my parents worked incredibly hard and treated each other with respect. My mother always told me that the person you choose to build a life with will either lift you up or quietly hollow you out, and for the longest time, I refused to believe that I had chosen wrong. I met my husband, Marcus, when I was 24. He was charming and confident, the kind of man who walked into a room and immediately became the center of it. We dated for 2 years, got engaged, and married in a small ceremony outside Niagara-on-the-Lake when I was 26. I was genuinely happy then. Or maybe I was just hopeful enough to mistake hope for happiness. The first year of marriage was fine, not extraordinary, but fine. Marcus worked in corporate finance downtown Toronto and kept long hours, which I understood. I worked as a graphic designer for a mid-sized agency, and I liked my career. I liked having something that was entirely mine. But when I got pregnant with Liam, things shifted in ways I hadn't expected. Marcus began making small comments, nothing dramatic enough to call out directly, but persistent enough to wear at me. If the apartment wasn't spotless when he came home, he'd run his finger along the kitchen counter and raise an eyebrow. If dinner wasn't ready, he'd sigh heavily and say something like, "I've been working since 7 this morning," as though I had spent the day on a lounge chair. I was 30 weeks pregnant, commuting to work on the subway, and managing our home, but apparently that didn't count as effort. I remember one evening distinctly. I had made shepherd's pie from scratch, set the table, even lit a candle because I thought it would be a nice gesture. Marcus came home, dropped his bag in the hallway, never once in the right place, always the hallway, always left for me to move, sat down, and said, "My mother makes hers with a proper crust on top. Did you forget the breadcrumbs?" I didn't respond. I picked up my fork and ate my dinner. When Liam was born in March, I was 37 weeks along and had a difficult labor, 16 hours, an epidural that only partially worked, and ultimately, a forceps delivery that left me unable to sit comfortably for 3 weeks. Marcus was present at the birth, which I was grateful for. But the moment we came home from the hospital, it became clear that his involvement had a ceiling. He'd hold Liam occasionally when the baby was calm and clean and smiling. The night feeds, the colic, the cluster feeding, the endless laundry, those fell entirely to me. I took my full maternity leave, which in Canada I was entitled to. 12 months. And I'm thankful I had it, because those months with Liam were precious, despite everything. I started a small blog during nap times, nothing serious, just writing about first-time motherhood, recipes I was trying, little moments from our neighborhood walks. It gave me an outlet. It gave me a small, quiet space that belonged to me. Our neighbor across the street was a woman named Diane Beaumont. She was in her early 50s, always impeccably dressed even when she was just checking her mail, and she had a warmth about her that drew people in. We had waved at each other for months before we actually spoke. One afternoon in October, when Liam and I were out for a walk, and he threw his stuffed rabbit onto her lawn. She picked it up, handed it back, and said, "He has excellent aim." That rabbit made it a full 6 feet. We laughed. We kept talking. She invited me in for tea, and just like that, Diane became one of the most important people in my life. She never pried. She never pushed. She simply listened when I talked, asked thoughtful questions, and occasionally said things like, "You know, a woman who carries that much on her own doesn't have to." I didn't fully understand what she meant at the time. I just knew that an hour with Diane felt like breathing properly for the first time all week. Marcus, for his part, barely registered Diane's existence. He had never come along when I introduced myself to our neighbors. He found that sort of thing tedious, and so he only knew her as the woman across the street. He didn't know her last name. He didn't know her husband's name. He didn't know anything about her life, because he had never once asked. As winter set in and Liam approached 11 months, something shifted in our household. Marcus had been increasingly distracted, or perhaps increasingly dismissive. It was hard to tell the difference anymore. He was going out with his work friends more often, coming home later, and when he was home he was on his phone. Not working necessarily, just elsewhere. The weekend in question began on a Thursday evening, when Marcus announced over dinner that he and 4 friends from his office had booked a ski weekend in Whistler, leaving Saturday morning. I stared at him. "This Saturday," I said. "Yeah. Trevor got a deal on a chalet. It's 3 nights. Liam has had a runny nose all week. I told you that. Kids always have runny noses in the winter. He'll be fine." I want to pause here and explain something, because I think it matters. Liam had not just had a runny nose. For 2 days he had been slightly warm, slightly fussier than usual, and not eating as well as normal. I had already called our family doctor's office, and they told me to monitor him and bring him in if his fever climbed or if he seemed lethargic. I had shared all of this with Marcus. He heard me. He simply decided it was not important. "I'm not comfortable with you being away right now," I said. "Can you push it by a week? Or at least 1 weekend?" He set down his fork. "I already paid. Non-refundable deposit." "How much was the deposit?" "That's not the point." "I think it kind of is the point." He looked at me with an expression I had come to recognize, patient but condescending, as though I were a child asking why the sky was blue. "Natalie, you've been on mat leave for almost a year. You're home every day. Managing one sick baby for a few days is not a crisis." I didn't sleep well that night. Liam woke twice, and by the 3rd feeding he felt warm enough that I took his temperature, 38.3. Not alarming, but climbing. I texted Marcus from the nursery. He didn't reply until morning, and when he did it was probably teething. Kids run hot when they're teething. He is not a doctor. I want to be clear about that. Saturday morning arrived and Liam's temperature was 38.9. I took it twice to be sure. He was whimpering quietly, instead of his usual babbling, which scared me more than any number on a thermometer. I stood in the kitchen while Marcus loaded a duffel bag into his car and told him again, clearly and directly, that I was concerned. "He's almost at 39, I said. "I might need to take him to sick kids." Marcus paused in the doorway. He looked at me, then at Liam, who was sitting in his bouncy chair looking more subdued than usual. "He's fine. Call the health line if you're worried. I'll have my phone on me. Your phone was on you last night too." He left. By 2 o'clock Saturday afternoon, Liam's fever had climbed to 40.1. He had stopped wanting to be put down and was pressing his face into my neck and making small sounds that I can only describe as exhausted distress. I called Telehealth Ontario, described the symptoms, and was told to bring him to the emergency department immediately given his age and the height of the fever. I called Marcus on the drive to the hospital. He picked up after 4 rings, and I could hear wind and other voices in the background. They were apparently already on the slopes. "His fever is 40.1, I said. "I'm taking him to emergency right now." There was a pause. Then, "Okay, keep me posted. Marcus, I need you to come home." Another pause. "Natalie, by the time I book a flight and get back to Toronto, it'll be midnight. You'll probably be discharged by then anyway. The doctors will take care of him. He's our son. I know he's our son, and he's going to be fine. You're at the hospital, he's getting care. I need you to just stay calm, okay? The doctors are with Liam right now. You don't need me there." And that was that. I walked into the sick kids' emergency department alone, carrying my 11-month-old son and a diaper bag, and I checked in at the front desk. A nurse with kind eyes took us into a triage room almost immediately given Liam's age and temperature. I answered every question, gave every piece of history, signed every form, all with Liam on my lap, pressing his hot little face against my chest. The woman in the waiting room chair beside us, before we were called back, looked at me with the kind of expression people give you when they see something quietly wrong. She handed me a pack of tissues without saying anything. I hadn't realized I was crying. What happened next is something I did not anticipate. While we were in the triage bay waiting for the attending physician, I heard a familiar voice from just outside the curtain. "Excuse me. I was told my neighbor was brought in. Young woman? Baby?" The curtain opened. It was Diane. I stared at her. "How did you?" "I saw you loading the car seat into your car alone," she said, walking straight to me and putting her hand on my back. "Marcus's car wasn't there. I called your cell and it went to voicemail, so I drove over." She looked at Liam, then back at me. "I'm here now. Tell me everything." She stayed for 4 hours. She held Liam when the nurses needed me to sign additional forms. She went to the hospital Tim Hortons and came back with tea and a muffin and set them beside me without making a production of it. When the attending pediatrician came to explain that Liam had a significant ear infection causing the high fever and that they wanted to keep him overnight for monitoring given his age, Diane asked every question. I was too exhausted to think of myself. I texted Marcus at 8 that evening. "They're admitting him overnight. Ear infection, high fever, monitoring." He replied 40 minutes later with, "Okay, let me know how he is in the morning. Hope he sleeps." I put my phone face down on the bedside tray and didn't touch it again for 3 hours. Somewhere around midnight, after Liam had finally fallen into a medicated sleep, and I was sitting in the vinyl chair beside his crib in the dim ward, Diane, who had gone home to let me have some quiet time, but had texted every hour, sent one final message. "I spoke to my husband tonight. He wants to help however he can. Try to rest. We're not going anywhere." I didn't understand the full weight of that sentence until later. The next morning, Liam's fever had begun to come down with the antibiotics. He was still tired, still clingy, but he looked at me with those dark eyes of his and reached for my finger, and I felt something steady and certain crystallize inside me. I had spent the night in a hospital chair, alone, while my husband skied, and I was done. Marcus arrived home Sunday evening. He walked in with his ski bag, cheeks slightly windburned, and said, "How is he?" When I told him Liam had spent the night admitted and was now home on antibiotics, he nodded and said, "See? They took care of it. I knew it would be fine. You weren't here, but you handled it. I shouldn't have had to handle it alone." He looked genuinely puzzled, and that puzzlement, more than the anger I had expected, was what broke something open in me. He did not understand what he had done. Or perhaps more accurately, he understood and did not believe it mattered. I said nothing else that evening. I got Liam settled, made myself dinner, and sat at the kitchen table with a notebook while Marcus watched television in the other room, and I started writing down every instance, every date I could remember, every comment, every absence, every moment he had chosen something else over us. I filled 4 pages. It took 3 more weeks for the situation to reach its final turning point, and it came from a direction Marcus never saw coming because Marcus had never once thought to look. Diane's husband, as I had known for some months by then, was the regional managing partner of one of the largest commercial law firms in Ontario. His name was Gerald Beaumont, and Diane had told me quietly, over tea one afternoon the previous summer, asking me gently not to mention it to Marcus. She had seen enough of how he operated from a distance to know it might create a strange dynamic. I had respected that completely. Marcus had no idea who lived across the street. What Marcus also didn't know was that his own firm, the corporate finance company where he had worked for 6 years, had recently brought on Gerald's firm for a significant merger review. Gerald was not a minor player in this. He was lead counsel. Diane had told Gerald about the hospital weekend. I had not asked her to, but she had told him, and from what she later shared with me, he had been quietly furious in the way that reserved, principled people tend to be not loud, but absolute. I had begun consulting a family lawyer of my own by this point, a woman named Priya Sandhu who came recommended through a women's resource network I had found online. I told her everything. I showed her my 4 pages of notes. She was steady and practical and did not once tell me what to do. She told me what my options were, and she let me choose. When I told Priya about Gerald and Diane, she paused thoughtfully and said, "That's significant context, but your case stands on its own regardless. Don't rely on it." I appreciated that. I didn't want to win because of who my neighbor's husband was. I wanted to be clear-eyed about what I was actually doing and why. But things moved in ways that were beyond my control or orchestration. It started when a woman in the sick kids' waiting room, the one who had handed me tissues, turned out to have a moderately followed Instagram account where she posted about parenting and family life. She had noticed me that night, had seen something in the situation that moved her, and she later posted a carefully worded account of what she had witnessed. A young mother, alone, with a sick infant, texting someone with no response while clearly frightened. She didn't name me. She didn't have to. She simply wrote about what it felt like to watch that, and what it said about how we sometimes leave our partners to carry everything alone. The post circulated. A friend of a friend tagged someone who knew Marcus, and then it reached his office. I only found out because a colleague of his sent him a screenshot, apparently believing Marcus would want to know, and Marcus came to me holding his phone with an expression I had never seen on him before. Something between shame and damage control. "Did you tell someone about the hospital?" he asked. "I didn't post anything." "Someone posted about you?" "Then someone saw something and felt moved to talk about it." "That's not something I arranged." He sat down. For the first time in our marriage, I watched Marcus not know what to say. What followed over the next several weeks was the kind of unraveling that happens when a person who has relied on performance and control suddenly loses the audience that made those things work. Marcus's colleagues had seen the post. His manager had questions about his judgment. Gerald's firm, lead counsel on the merger Marcus's company was managing, had Gerald, who said nothing directly but whose quiet withdrawal of warmth spoke volumes to people who paid attention to such things. Marcus was not fired. I want to be accurate. But he was passed over for a promotion he had expected, and conversations happened in rooms he was no longer invited into. The professional cost was real, if not total. More significantly, he served with divorce papers. Priya managed the entire process with a calm efficiency I deeply admired. Marcus initially resisted, then bluffed, then attempted a phone call to me directly that I took at Priya's office with her beside me and a recording running legal in Ontario with one-party consent. On that call, he told me I was making a mistake, that I was overreacting to one weekend, that he had always provided for our family and I had no idea how hard he worked for us. When I said quietly, "Marcus, this conversation is being recorded and will be used in our proceedings," there was a silence long enough that Priya glanced sideways at me with something close to satisfaction. The custody arrangement was established fairly quickly once Marcus understood that the hospital admission record, the telehealth call log, my 4 pages of notes, and the recorded phone call formed a picture that no reasonable person would interpret kindly. He agreed to shared custody every other weekend and one weekday evening with primary residence for Liam with me. Child support was calculated according to the federal guidelines. He signed. He tried, once, to tell me that none of this would have happened if I had been less dramatic about one ski weekend. I told him, with complete composure, that none of this would have happened if he had come home when our son was in the hospital. That was the last real conversation we had. Liam is now almost 2. He is healthy and funny and obsessed with garbage trucks in a way that is completely sincere. He waves at every single one. I have gone back to work part-time at my agency, which welcomed me back warmly, and I have kept up the blog, which has grown more than I ever expected it to. I don't write about Marcus. I write about what I know. Motherhood, starting over, the strange, quiet dignity of building your own life on your own terms. Diane and Gerald have become genuinely important people in my life, and in Liam's. Diane's son, a 31-year-old architect named Cole, who works primarily out of Montreal but visits his parents often, first met Liam and me at Diane's kitchen table over a Sunday brunch last spring. He looked at Liam, who immediately handed him a plastic dinosaur as an offering of goodwill, and said, "I think we've been accepted." I laughed for the first time in what felt like a long time. I don't know what the future looks like in full. I'm not in a rush to know. What I know is that I spent years in a situation that quietly told me my exhaustion didn't count, my fear didn't qualify, my presence was expected but my absence at any moment would be fine. And I stayed because I kept hoping the person I thought I had married would reappear. He didn't. And I finally understood that hoping for a different past is not the same as building a better future. Here is what I want to say to anyone who recognizes something in this story, and I say this not to preach, but because I wish someone had said it plainly to me. Your fear during a crisis is not overreacting. Your need for a partner who shows up is not neediness. A person who consistently chooses their own comfort over your genuine distress is showing you, clearly and repeatedly, what you mean to them. Believe them the first time it happens. You don't have to leave immediately, these things are complicated and leaving takes time and resources and courage, but start believing what you are being shown. Write things down. Talk to someone you trust. Know that the law, at least in this country, is designed to protect you and your children. Family lawyers who work with women in difficult marriages exist, and many offer initial consultations at low or no cost. You are not trapped, even when it feels entirely like you are. And one more thing, because Liam will read this someday, and I want him to understand. The night I sat alone in that hospital room beside your crib, watching your chest rise and fall and willing your fever to break, was the night I became entirely sure of what kind of mother I was going to be, and what kind of life I was going to build for both of us. You gave me that clarity, my love. You always were the point of everything.